Okay. All right. So the issue is basically what I was asked to talk about explanation of what Hinduism is to largely non-Indian population. Or most of them appear to be IT group working at Merck. But the person who contacted me is obviously Indian. She contacted Harish Bhai and Harish Bhai contacted me and then I spoke with her. She lives in Illinois. Most of the people who will be listening are Americans of non-Indian, non-Hindu origin, call it that way. So idea was basically to explain to them what Hinduism is and what are the common perceptions in Western world and how do you explain that. And then basically they asked me to talk about common traditions and common like themes about temple and those kind of things. Some try put some pictures of temple, etc. But the idea is basically try to condense into 45 minutes of explanation of importance or basic ideas of Hinduism. Many of the things that I have written here is not new to you, or at least not new to most of us, because we already know many of these things are inherently, understood by us, but it is often is new to them. So I wrote down in a way that I can explain to them what this means. First of all, what is emigenetic perspective? Emic perspective is like the people who are within their own tradition, how they perceive things. Like like we are Hindus, so when we know about what we know about Hinduism, what is our perception? But if the same issue was looked from outside in, is scholastic perspective. So like somebody who is looking from outside inside. I mean, when we talk about Christianity, we find some of these idea kind of weird, right? Physical resurrection and miracles and all those. We take it with a pinch of salt. So when they look at us, they have the same issue. આપણે ગયા વખતે વાત કરી હતી કે યુકેરિસ્ટ કે ભાઈ you drink wine as a representation of Christ's blood and eat bread as a Christ's flesh. So it sounds like bizarre, right? So when they listen to us and look at કાલી માતાની લાલ જીભ બહાર પડી હોય અને ખોપરી હાથમાં હોય and I mean that looks bizarre to them too, right? So how different things can come across depending upon what you are. I mean Ganapati તમે જુઓ, so how we look at Ganapati and the way, and if somebody looks from outside કે Ganapati and Hanuman કે monkey and hathi, how can they be God? So you can see the point is basically emic and emitic perspective are different. Often people within the tradition look at the same issue. Same other example, many of us don't think about it. And let me give an example. When we look at Shivling, you know the history. Actually, Shivling is a manifestation of a penis and vagina. Yeah. I mean, if you look at from our perspective, we go and pray, but to an outsider, it will look like, what kind of nonsense is this? So you can get the point, basically. So you're trying to explain this to a Western audience who may or may not understand or may find it bizarre, call it that way. All right, I think this is basically the statistics that I had shown before also. Number of people by distribution, Christians and Muslim are number 1 and 2, and Hindus are number 3. So about 1.1 to 1.3 billion people of Hindu origin. So another explanation is what is dharma and what is religion. Most of the Western categories look at the religion and use dharma in the same context, but dharma doesn't necessarily translate into religion. So when we talk about dharma, let me give you an example of what I mean. Sum total of all the beliefs that were prevalent or have been prevalent on the banks of Sindhu is a religion called Hinduism. So most of the religions are centered on a theology. People congregate and come together based on a theology or religious principle that the prophet taught. So people come around the idea of what the prophet taught. Dharma is a different way. Dharma is a sum total of everything that existed, all belief systems that existed on the banks of Sindhu River includes Hinduism. So Hinduism now was a religion categorized by Britishers. It was never a religion per se, as most of the Western religions think in terms of religion. So the reason Hinduism has a wide umbrella-like structure is because everything that people lived in the banks of Sindhu River were together called Hinduism. So it started from no God or maybe God to maybe many, many gods to one God to I am God. Everything from that point is included in Hinduism. Most of the religions don't have that way. Religions have one teaching or one group of teaching based on whatever the founder taught. Dharma tradition doesn't have that. That's most important difference. And Dharma is basically, call it theology, or the principle of theology is one aspect of Dharma. It is not that Dharma, it is not the religion itself. Like when we talk about four things important to Hinduism: Kama, Artha, Dharma, and Moksha. So those kind of things are, I mean, most of the religion will not talk about Kama, will not talk about Artha. No, I mean, so what the way I'm going to explain this, I'm not going to talk in this great detail because I don't even have time. What I'm going to say is this: the Dharma tradition is like pigeonholing a wide variety of belief system into one, which it doesn't exist in Hinduism. There is no one system within Hinduism because Hinduism is a Dharma tradition, and Dharma tradition is an umbrella organization. It is not one thing that fits into a religion system as Western religions are defined. So that's basic difference. Dharma is a conglomeration of many religions. As a matter of fact, Hinduism can be divided into many religions: Vaishnavism, Shaivism, Smartism, Devism, or those kind of things. So if you look at the category of Hindus, you can divide into 3 or 4 different categories of religion per se. But all of them are collectively called Hinduism. That's the difference. And I know that I'm not going to belabor this point in a long time because I don't have time, but you get the point. So another difference: religion is a single founder, single or a group of holy books, united method of worship, and centralized hierarchy. Those are the characteristics of classical religion. Hinduism fits into none of them. At least Hinduism, as it is understood in Western category, doesn't fit into that because there is no founder, there is no single person, there is no specific dogma. You can believe in every possible way, from no God to many gods, and you still be called Hindu. Now, Christianity or Islam or Judaism will not accept that. You cannot have all this mixture of religion, mixture of belief system in a typical religion of Western category. There is no centralized institution. You cannot be inducted or you cannot be expelled. આપણે મુસલમાનોમાં ફતવા કે that you will be disbarred. Right. Christianity, I sent you Nicene Creed, how they wrote. If you don't believe in this, you will be expelled out of the religion, or you will be stigmatized, you will be ostracized. None of these things exist in Hinduism. Nobody can throw me out of Hinduism. Nobody can convert me into Hinduism if I don't want to. So that is the difference. Another difference is it is continuously evolving. There is nothing that prohibits you from believing newer things. So another thing, a Hindu can worship Christ as a God. A Hindu can worship any other religion, Buddha as God too. A Christian will not do the other way around, or Islam will not allow the other way. A Muslim, yeah, go ahead.
Rajan Bhai, you were talking about religion and dharma, and now you are talking about Hinduism and Christianity. There is, I'm,
The
I'm,
reason
I'm trying to kind of, I'm becoming a Christian listening to your lecture, and I'm getting confused.
એટલે હું એવું કહું છું કે તું ક્રિશ્ચન ને કહેતો હોય એવી રીતે કે
Oh, okay. Well, maybe
No,
because
I think Rajan bhai તમે ધર્મનું ચાલુ કર્યું ને એના કરતા પહેલા if you could have given some background on Hinduism probably would help.
Because you expect, you're talking to Hindus so you can jump around and it's fine, but when you talk to a Christian, he may not understand where and how you come from one to the other back to. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Right. I mean, you have a valid point. I'll think about that too. Yeah, right. Okay. I mean, actually, I'm going to be talking with a smaller group next 10 days, 2 weeks, because they want to listen to what I'm going to say and then suggest for the larger group.
Yeah.
Good.
પછી તમે ધર્મ પર આવશો ને કે why dharma is what that it is, that might be helpful. But શરૂઆતમાં તમે if you concentrate a little bit on what is Hinduism, probably would helpful.
Okay, maybe I'll change this slide in a different way. Yeah, okay, makes sense. Yeah, I agree.
ના એટલે તું પેલું આપણને વાત કરે છે એવી રીતે એટલે પેલું કેવું કે he knows કે આપણે we are Indian એટલે
Correct.
you are talking to Christian એવી રીતે વાત કરે એમ કહું.
Okay, all right.
અમારો ક્રિશ્ચિયાનિટી નો કોર્સ થઈ ગયો છે, so we are all Christians right now.
We are all Christian.
You already have a slide, Rajan bhai, that explains little bit about all of that, so you may have to just change the order.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, makes sense. I'll think through it. Yeah, I'll read through slide again and try and see how I can rearrange in a different way.
Yeah. And if you need to brainstorm, call any of us,
Sure. Okay, good. Let's move on. Okay, so dharma is a source of continuously flowing spirituality. There are 4 ways an authority is established, called Shruti, Smruti, Achar, conduct, and Atmatusti. The basic explanation is this. Shruti is like a religious text, similar to what Bible will be, and it's called Vedas in Hinduism. Smritis are texts which are heard or are remembered instead of heard, which essentially are second group of categories of religious texts. Conduct is basically how a religious person will behave. So you try to mimic that. And Atmatusti is the conscience. And the reason there is a hierarchy is olden system, it was based on 1 to 4, just the way it is really stated. But modern Hinduism, especially since the time of Vivekananda and Mahatma Gandhi, it has been changed upside down. More or less that everything that must be followed through must meet your conscience first. An example will be like Mahatma Gandhi said something like this: words have, like man himself, an evolution. In even a Vedic text, which are Hindu scriptures, must be rejected if it is repugnant to the reason and contrary to the experience. So it is important to understand is that most of the modern scholars and religious figures are willing to let go the religious text as the sound foundation of how one should behave if it is not necessarily meeting the current environment standards. So they are not necessarily dogmatic about the fact is that because the scripture says something, that is the way one must behave or one must act. So which is somewhat different in most of the Western religions, is that most of the religious scholars will say you must adhere to what the scriptures teach, regardless of what the current environment is. And Hinduism is much more open-minded about that. So what are the major characteristics of or tenets of Hindu Dharma? One is that there is a supreme being which is described to be Brahman, which is similar to Holy Spirit in the context of Christianity, which is both immanent and transcendental, which is within this world and beyond this world. And it is also cause of this world, and it exists within the world. It's called efficient cause and the material cause. The second category is avatar. Just like in Christianity, Christ is supposed to be the Son of God who incarnated himself into the world. Hinduism believes that the God figure manifests himself or herself through many avatars, not just one avatar. And there have been 9 avatars so far, and it is primarily through the evolution process. The first being Matsya avatar, which is a fish, and then aquatic life becomes animal life, and animal life eventually evolves into human life. And most of you are aware of Hare Rama, Hare Krishna. Both of them are avatar. Rama and Krishna are the avatar, which is well known in the Western world. So those are the 2 last avatars. And then Buddha was also inducted as an avatar as well. So the avatar concept has a similarity to the process of evolution in science, because it starts from aquatic life and eventually metamorphoses into human life, which has a direct connection to evolution process. Now, karma is a concept which is unique to Hinduism and primarily to Eastern religion that emanated in India. Law of cause and effect, that one creates his own destiny by his or her own action, thoughts, and words. So one must pay the price of what you have done or thought, which is similar to what you saw what you reap is what you saw in the Western concept. So essentially, no one can escape the law of karma. One must pay a price of his own action or thought or deed. And that's the basis of karma. Reincarnation is a concept that we continuously evolve over many lives, called rebirth or reincarnation, which is a unique concept, primarily Eastern religion, not necessarily acceptable to most of the Semitic Western religions, which is primarily based on one life to live and permanent hell or heaven after that. Another one is universe goes through endless cycles of creation, preservation, and dissolution. Now, the well-known astronomer said something about the evolution process and cycle of creation, that the universe has come in existence over many, many billions of years. And he said, Carl Sagan, he said that if one goes by scientific proof, Hinduism has probably come as close as possible to the current thinking of science, which is that universe has existed for 4 billion years or so. And Hindu cycle is approximately 4.8 billion years cycle. So process of evolution happens, evolution and involution happens every 4.8 billion years, which is almost similar to what current scientific thinking is, that this universe has existed for 4 billion years. And the last category is inclusivity, is that there is acceptance of many different pathways and not necessarily being hung up on one specific pathway will lead to salvation. So Hinduism is much more open-minded and tolerant of other belief systems, and it does not claim to have a monopoly of salvation, because they believe that all of us eventually will go through the salvation Some will go faster, some will go slower, but eventually all of us will. It is not that if you don't believe in XYZ, you will not be receiving the salvation and you will be burning in hell once and for all. Now, this is a court case in India where they were deciding what constitutes Hinduism. Partly because of the reason is that there were laws written that applied to Hindus and laws that were written that don't apply to Hindus. So how do you decide who is and who is not? So Supreme Court was brought in the picture, and this is their explanation of who are Hindus and who will be called non-Hindus, like Christians and Muslims and some of the subgroups of Hinduism eventually seceded, like Jainism was taken out of fold of Hinduism. So what were they? Acceptance of Vedas as a reverence, with reverence. Now, when they wrote reverence, they did not mean is that we must believe in a literal sense what Vedas says. So typical religion will say whatever is stated in the book must be taken literally. When we talk about reverence, we don't necessarily talk about dogmatic interpretation of what the text says. It may mean abstract understanding. So you may revere things, but you don't necessarily have to follow every word of it. And second part is that meaning of the word changes over centuries and thousands of years. So what the original writer said may or may not mean what we understand it to be. And that's important part. Spirit of tolerance, we already covered that. They also emphasize world rhythm, the cycle of creation, maintenance, is dissolution that will happen, and it's accepted by all 6 systems of Hindu philosophy. Acceptance and belief in rebirth and re-existence. So it is a standard belief in all Eastern religion that came from India, be it Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, or Hinduism, is that we have existed in some form over many, many lives and will continue to exist until we reach the final salvation. And ways of salvations are many. So it is not necessarily dogmatic, is that one must adhere to a specific way to reach the status of salvation. And the question of idol worship versus abstract worship. So Supreme Court accepts is that there may be many gods or maybe one God, and the idol worship may or may not be acceptable to all. So those were the basic variations that Supreme Court put in to make a determination of which subgroup of religion will be defined as Hindus or non-Hindus. Dinesh bhai, you were saying something?
There is the very first bullet says, you know, that you accept
Sir,
Veda.
નજીક આવો ને તમારો અવાજ બહુ ઓછો આવે છે.
Very first bullet, you said that the acceptance of Veda, and then in previous slide or two, you said Hinduism is very open. You can follow this or you cannot follow this. So again, it's difficult. I mean, you know, is it Veda? Veda is the Bible, or nothing is the Bible? Which one?
Well, and that is why the word reverence is used. It means that you honor and you respect what the Veda says, but you don't follow dogmatically what it says. So if your conscience says is that what it says is not necessarily acceptable to the current environment, you don't necessarily have to adhere to that concept.
And you still are a Hindu.
Yeah, you are still Hindu. So you respect, but you don't necessarily follow word by word of what Vedas teach.
So, Rajan bhai, can you clarify what the Supreme Court said of India?
That Supreme Court said, this is actually the sentence that they use. Acceptance of Vedas with reverence as the highest authority and religious and and philosophical matter. So they did not use adherence to Vedas. So most of the Hindus will say that we accept Vedas as the final authority, most of the
Right.
religious texts. But what Supreme Court said is that we revere the Vedas. We don't necessarily take that as a final authority.
So there is no final authority in Hinduism.
Well, modern thinking is that no, it is one of the most important authority, but there is no such thing is that if you don't believe in Vedas, that you are disbarred.
I see.
You are, I mean, the reason Buddhism and Jainism differentiated themselves out and went out of that, they said we do not accept Vedas as the final authority. They
Right.
did not say that we reject them. They said we do not accept them as the final authority. And Supreme Court basically said the same thing, is that it is not necessary to dogmatically follow. If you say, I don't believe in Vedas, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are not Hindu.
You are not Hindu.
Got it. Got it.
I think this is basically explaining that this will be similar to what the Trinity of Christianity is that there is a
Brahma, Vishnu.
Brahma, which is a lord of creation, Vishnu is a lord of preservation, and Shiva is a lord of dissolution. So when somebody talks about dissolution and destruction, Shiva is not a destroyer. Shiva is a dissolver. And that's important to understand. A dissolver is the one that takes off things that become useless over a period of time in order to create new things. So when one destroys, it is destruction per se. It is not a destruction. It is a dissolution
uplifting.
for next cycle. So that there's a renewal phenomena involved. When somebody talks about Shiva, that is most important part of understanding, is that just like a corporation comes to an end, often the end of the corporation is not necessarily end of cycle. It is the end of that cycle, but it's not end of that process. It is a newer cycle that once one begins to form.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. True.
very
That-
nice explained.
That makes real good sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so what are the four major branches of Hinduism? Vaishnavism is Lord Vishnu is the God, and most commonly seen gods are Rama and Krishna are incarnation of Lord Vishnu. Shaivism, God is Shiva. Now, when I mentioned about avatar, Shaivism specifically rejects the concept of avatar. There is no avatar of Shiva. So when the avatar concept was included in the tenets of Hinduism, Shaivism doesn't necessarily buy into that. But that does not necessarily mean they are not Hindus. That's important to understand, is that these are the major categories. You don't necessarily have to adhere to every single entity within that. But these are most commonly accepted entities within the tenets of Hinduism. Shaktas. Now, this is a unique concept which is not commonly seen in the Western religion, that goddess is Shakti, and Shakti is the form of female version. None of the Western religions have a female god, and that's most important part, which is unique, that Hinduism has both male and female version of God in their systems. And Smartas are the ones where deity that you believe, either Shiva or Vishnu or